let's also move forward to bringing you another leader to take forward the conversation about riding the disruption wave. We're talking about Mr. Piyush Gupta, who's the CEO of DBS Bank, and as we all know, that DBS is a leading financial services group in Asia, headquartered in Singapore, and is also recognized for its global leadership. We have with us none other than Piyush Gupta, who will be in conversation with Saloni Shukla, Deputy Banking Editor, The Economic Times. So we're talking about riding the disruption wave, and it's time to deep dive into another very fascinating conversation coming your way. Here we go.
Good day to all of you, and thanks for joining us at Economic Times Global Business Summit. Today, we have a very interesting conversation lined up with you, a man who needs no introduction, a global banker, a man who we are all proud to call an Indian, Mr. Piyush Gupta, the Chief of DBS Bank. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Saloni, it's a pleasure to be on the summit again and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, sir. So we are in the midst of, black swan events, as we were chatting earlier. We have more than 2 years of COVID behind us. We've seen how digitization and sustainability have really taken root. In the last 2 years, we can see it's really moved the needle when it comes to these two, theories in the banking world. How are you seeing, the next 5 years? Are you seeing that there is a path clearly set about how the banks, global banks, Indian banks will take digitization and sustainability forward from here?
Saloni, I think to suggest that a path has been clearly set would be a stretch. And the reason for that is the pace of change is dramatic. Things are changing all around us. And in fact, things are changing around us, not just on the technology and sustainability front, but as we were referring to before the call, in the geopolitical front as well. And as I jokingly said, I see more black swans these days than I see white swans. So I think it's very hard to say whether the path has been set in a firm direction for 5 years. But I think some things are obviously quite important to note. Number one, I call this the base case. I mean, table stakes for everybody in the world is digitization. It's been happening for several years. The pandemic has accelerated that at great pace. People have talked about 5 years of digitization happening in 5 or 6 months, and that is indeed true. We are seeing that across the spectrum in consumption of all kinds of services, whether it's education services or financial services or medical services or gaming, etc. Digital consumption has gone through the roof. In fact, digital is today almost 15 or 16% of global GDP. That's extraordinary if you think about digital demand forming such a large part of global GDP. So that's one change in the direction of travel which has been set. A second, which has been set, is the actual capacity of companies and corporations to digitize themselves. This is not just to do with the distribution system. This is to do with the production system, their own end-to-end services and their own end-to-end processes. Companies found that they had to do this to be able to survive in the digital environment when employees weren't coming into work and workers were all working from remote. So that has changed dramatically as well, the internal capacity and need for companies to digitize themselves. But the third thing that's happened, which has been quite interesting as part of this base case, I call it, is that the infrastructure itself has started getting digitized. And they started getting digitized at 3 different levels. One, large companies have started digitizing their own supply chain and their own end-to-end infrastructure. I call it anchor-led. Large anchors are changing the way they buy, sell, and operate within the ecosystem. The second is that more and more companies are beginning to use industry-level solutions and industry platforms to be able to bring efficiency to the end-to-end process, particularly supply chains, where it's quite interesting. Companies realize that in the pandemic, you needed visibility. You needed second order, third order, and fourth order visibility, and they suddenly realized they didn't have that visibility. So trying to leverage industry solutions and industry platforms to get better visibility and efficiency and resiliency in the supply chain, the second thing that's happening. And finally, there are government-led solutions. So a lot of governments have realized that things have moved far enough along to be able to start sponsoring the same kind of efficiency and effectiveness, but at scale around the system. Now, I see all of these as part of a trend which will definitely continue. And maybe we can dive into some more examples of these. There's some examples in India and some in Singapore. But beyond that, and the reason I said that it's unclear where this might go, the second big change that I'm seeing is the use of AI, machine learning, and data. In the last 2 years, because you weren't able to meet people, you weren't able to make customers, the need for data-driven decision-making, data-driven operating models, and AI and ML-driven models has increased dramatically. This has always been the case in the big tech, but now it's getting beyond big tech. Now, where this line of travel goes, though, is a function a little bit about things which are uncertain: data privacy, data nationalization, models. What is the appropriate and suitability regimes in different countries and markets. So I think this is a trend that will continue, but there are certain things that need to be hurdles that need to be thought through and crossed. Beyond that, at a third level, I think things are still nascent and therefore very fluid. And that is what has also happened is the tokenization economy on the back of blockchain solutions has really also taken off within these 2 years. Now, it's arguable that this has nothing to do with the pandemic. It's just happenstance that this technology has come to its fruition tipping point around this time. Be that what it may, the reality is that crypto coins, CBDCs, stable coins, tokenization, NFTs, all of these have taken a new life in the last 12 months. How far these goes and what impact they have on the global system of both banks and corporations is still a little bit more hazy, a little bit less clear.
Yeah, I will come on the crypto point in a bit, but I just wanted to, get a sense on more on the, global supply chain and, how businesses have been transforming. Mr. Gupta, you were somebody who thought of a digibank when, digital was not the buzzword, and, that system has really evolved. We've seen neobanks and, a lot of other, formulas now being tried. But when you thought of digibank at that point of time, businesses were not looking at digital in a very big way. But now in the last 2-3 years, we've seen, the entire supply chain getting digitized. How are you seeing that change? And as a banker, how are you dealing with this?
Well, you said it well. Everything is getting, let me give you an example, going back to my first point I made. So let me give you 3 examples of 3 specific, well, I'll give you 4. So first at the infrastructure level, India actually is a front runner in digital infrastructure. And that's what we created with the India Stack, with the UPI framework, the digital capacity, including a digital locker, frankly, which we don't use very much. But the whole Aadhaar, electronic and digital KYC and the UPI infrastructure was the infrastructure play, which predated COVID. It's actually today a gold standard among many countries in the world. But the 3 examples I have on top of that will tell you how much shift the corporate sector and businesses have started making. First, you take the example of a group like the Tatas. Now, they're putting together this metal junction. And they're putting a metal junction together to create an ecosystem of everybody to do with the steel supply chain. So Tata Steel, obviously, but everybody, distributors, suppliers, vendors, company producers, all are going to aggregate on a single ecosystem. Now, when you can do that, you can get tremendous efficiency. All the paperwork around invoicing, receivables, payables, payment system, inventory, track record, logistics, everything becomes transparent. And the amount of efficiency you can create in the system is huge. You also create the opportunity for financiers or banks like us to plug into that ecosystem. Now, these kinds of solutions, a solution like the metal exchange, the metal junction, whatever, I'm seeing this in many companies. A lot of large companies are beginning to leverage digitalization to change the way they buy, sell, and operate their own systems. A second level is things that are happening at an industry level. Again, the examples in Singapore as well, but I'll give you an example in India that we are closely involved with. There is an industry solution currently focused, it's called ODEX, for overseas document exchange. It's put together to help from the shipping companies to the freight forwarders to the customs duty payment. The entire value chain is being digitized around the whole industry. Now, this is not one company. This is a platform play, but bringing in a whole range of different participants in the entire industry and changing the way that industry functions. Again, we are involved with it because we are plugged into that. And so we allow people to buy foreign exchange from us to make their overseas payments, to take loans from us, to do their freight forward in the billing, etc. But we're not the only one. Other banks can plug into it as well. Now, this is the capacity to transform an industry by bringing digitization to bear. And the third example I want to give you, which is at a country government level, I'm struck that the government of India has announced this national logistics portal. Now, I haven't gone through the details of the portal, but I can tell you, I can see the parallels of what we're doing here in Singapore. So because of the COVID, we launched two efforts and exercise in Singapore. One is called SG Findex. So it's a financial data exchange. And the other is called SG TradeX, which is a trade data exchange. The trade data exchange is a coming together of the port, some shipping companies, the banks, the customs authorities, the government agencies all together to try and create an industry transformation which brings in the government as a player, the customs authorities, the tax authorities, but also brings in many private sector people to see how we can get an industry level transformation, but driven by the government. Okay? So at all levels, whether it's government driven or industry driven or anchor driven, you can see that the nature of the business processes is being rethought. And when you do that, you actually make a big difference to the paperwork, to the payments capability, to the financing capability. Everything can change. I see this happening at rapid scale around the world and certainly around the region. I think this is one of the big outcomes of the crisis that you're going to see a lot of. Now in that context, my last comment, I think India has a particular advantage. A lot of the solutioning around many of these things, India is particularly good at because India has the technology talent and the technology capability. So if you create the right infrastructure solutions, those infrastructure solutions can actually transport from within the country to regional and global players. It's something that is for India to look at.
So clearly, very interesting time to be a banker. But one more point, that you made about, stable coins and NFTs and cryptos. As a banker and, the domestic ones that I speak to here, they are pretty, confused. And it's very difficult because central banks are sort of making up their mind on what and how they see cryptos and stable coins and NFTs, and not very comfortable, most central banks, because we haven't even seen the US Fed come out with a detailed policy on how it plans to deal with it. RBI on its part, has been working on a CBDC, how that model will work, wholesale, retail. You as a banker, you as a global banker who's seen, multiple countries, how are you viewing this? Especially at a time when the regulators themselves are sort of, figuring out, the regulations that will control this sort of framework.
Yeah, so Saloni, it's a big subject. Let me try and parse it into a few big thoughts. The first thought is this, that at the root of all of these, whether it's crypto or CBDC or stable coin, is blockchain. And so you're going to start with the premise that, what does blockchain do and give, which can be a game changer? Effectively, what blockchain does, it lets you establish trust in a direct person-to-person construct without an intermediary, without a hub in the middle. And that idea is a very powerful idea. The fact that the reason it happens is that there's a distributed ledger and everybody is recording on a distributed ledger, and the distributed ledger is being verified by hundreds and millions of participants. So you don't need a central body. Now, the power of that idea is huge, because if you take that idea to its logical extreme, which is what the idealists would like to do, the people who this thing, you would say this means that sooner or later, we can imagine a world with 8 billion self-sovereign individuals, and you don't need any central authorities. People say, do you need banks? I ask, if you take this to logical extreme, you don't need a central bank. And by the way, you don't even need nation states and governments. Every individual in this world can be an individual of his own, and we will deal with each other based on smart contracts, and you don't need an edifice of rules other than the smart contract. Now, I don't see that happening. But I think recognizing that the technology has the power to change the notion of a hub and spoke model to a distributed model, that's a really important thing to understand. Even before I go to your specific question on cryptos, let me just take the extension of that. I think what this technology will do, Saloni, is it has the power to change the back office of the world. And today, most of the back office of the world works through hub and spoke arrangements. You have a stock exchange and everybody deals through a central stock exchange. You know how much money you have in the bank because we all have accounts with the bank. The banks know how much money we have because we all have accounts with the central bank. If you can imagine a world where everything is instantly known to everybody through a blockchain, it can change how trade finance gets processed and work. It can change how payment and settlement and clearing gets processed and work. It can change how exchanges or the exchange of value between each other can work. So it's got some pretty profound consequences. And a lot of use cases around these consequences are indeed being developed as we speak. One particular use case of this is this notion of money and value. So if you have this kind of technology, can you use it for money and value? Finally, what is money? Money is is a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. But finally, it allows you to transfer value to each other. And you would argue that this kind of technology then lets you rethink how you should transfer value, which means you can rethink the nature of money. So that's the idea behind each of these things. Now, again, next step. So now you get to, how does the blockchain support different kinds of money? So the first is, do you get digital money? To my view, you already have digital money. 98% of money in the world is not currency and note, it's not fiat. It's all Swift messages, it's even credit cards and debit cards, these are all digital. Nobody actually touches and feels anything in. So I don't think digital money is a question, you will get digital money. Next question. So do you wind up with private money like crypto and crypto coins? That's where you start getting complicated. The problem with private money issued by, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., is it is subject to 2 or 3 big challenges. Number one, because nobody knows who owns it. Nobody knows what the authentication or the verification of ownership is. It is subject to misuse. So this is what the governor of RBI is so concerned about. Monetary system instability, AML, KYC issues, those could be real. And even you take this Russian-Ukraine crisis, one of the biggest issues being focused on right now are cryptos being used to evade sanctions, as an example. Apart from that, the second big challenge with private money in the cryptos is volatility in value. Bitcoin goes from 50,000 to 25,000 overnight. Now, if you want to use this to pay for something, you don't know whether it's costing you 50,000 or 25,000 from one day to the other. Obviously, you can't use that. So today, cryptos are a potential source of speculative value. You could say they're like gold. But it's unlikely that crypto and private money is a real source of money as we know it. However, if you move to the next thing, which is you take central bank digital currency. Now you've addressed both those points. I know the central bank is issuing this. I know it's replacing fiat currency. It's controlled by the same architecture, and is given to me as a citizen in my phone. So I mean, you've taken care of those challenges. But even CBDCs come with a separate set of challenges, and that main challenge is: do you want to go direct to the individual, or you want to distribute the CBDC through the existing banking system? If you want to go direct to the individual, some people are talking about it. Every individual, every citizen opens a direct account with the central bank, and the central bank disburses the CBDCs directly to the individual. The downside of that is you disintermediate the existing banking system, and therefore you make the whole process of credit creation now the onus and responsibility of the central bank alone. And most central banks don't want to take the onus and responsibility of creating credit. So it's a challenge. However, if you distribute CBDCs through an intermediated process, through the banking system, it can work, but then you got to see what is the value you got, what is the upside you got by doing this relative to letting the banks already do what we do with our own digital payment methodology and so on. It's not entirely clear. The third piece is stablecoin. So you have it's not a central bank thing, but it is backed by resources of fiat and securities and so on, like Tether in the US. And I think stablecoin is something people have tried, but it is not easy to verify and audit whether it's truly backed by the fiat currency or securities, etc. So in short, my view is that digital money will come. I think some countries will try retail CBDCs. I think there will be a much bigger case for wholesale CBDCs and cross-border CBDCs in time. A lot of central banks are working on it. I think private currency or crypto might not easily become money as we know it, but I think as stores of value and as alternatives to gold and gold value, I think they will have a place. Today, there's already $2.4 trillion of Bitcoin in the system. Now, it's not small. It's not as big as the money supply in the system, but $2.5 trillion is nothing to be scoffed at. And therefore, my view, in fact, I was talking to several central bank governors just yesterday. My view is that you have 2 ways of dealing with it. Either regulate it out of the formal banking system. I think that would be an unwise thing to do because you just push it out into the unregulated banking system. And then you have no ways of creating any kind of guardrails or OB markers at all. The alternative approach is to think about how you can work within the formal banking system to try and put the appropriate protections and guardrails and bring some of these alternative payment tools for the future and give them life.
Very wide topic. We can have a separate discussion on this. But moving on to another question, just want to get your view on, sustainability and banking. Now, a lot of people are saying that sustainability is the new digital. And banks have emerged as a major force in financing sustainable goals. There are several papers being floated around how banks, are tying up with public sector enterprises, and they are funding, and coming out with climate change goals and clean financing and all those things. How are you seeing this emerge? Because there are a lot of goals, 2050 goals, other goals that have been set up by several institutions. How are you seeing this concept emerge?
Yeah, Saloni, I believe this is the next big, trillion-dollar opportunity. So it is the next digitization, to be sure. I think without a doubt, it's quite clear that, the nature and state of planet Earth means we're going to have to do something. And therefore, decarbonizing the economic system over time is a must do. Now, by the way, I hasten to add, this is not binary, it cannot happen tomorrow. I meant it when I said over time. So over the next 20, 30, India said 2070, 50 years, but again, the direction of travel is clear. Now, when you think about that we have to decarbonize and create a new economic model, which is a lower carbon economic model, then you start figuring, well, we've got trillions of dollars of extant infrastructure today. The way we, create our plants, our manufacturing, our transportation, our agriculture, our marine industries, everything's going to have to change. And if everything's going to have to change, then you're going to need a lot of financing to be able to finance this change. It can only be done in a smooth way, in a glide path. So, but helping companies and industries to figure out what is the carbon emissions intensity you have today. Second, helping them demonstrate and create this transition pathway that is sensible. And then financing the transition is a trillion-dollar opportunity without a doubt. Now, what we do as a bank, for example, we look at what are things we need to do less of, which means if we can start scaling back on our coal financing, that's probably a good thing. If we can start dialing up our renewable energy, solar, wind, etc., that's a good thing. So we can give us as targets, but we are a little thoughtful about not taking binary positions. And the reason for that is the minute you go binary, let's assume you say, I don't want to do fossil fuel tomorrow. Well, we're already seeing the impact of oil prices and gas prices all over the world. The cost of gas in Europe is up 10x in the last couple of years. Oil, as you know, is up $140 as you and I are speaking. A large part of this is because of inadequate capital investment in some of the critical fossil fuel industries that you still need. So making sure we get the balance right in helping companies become less brown and more green, but at the same time making sure the investments serve to keep the economy going, the wheels of the economy running, and not creating problems on the social front. I mean, you're trying to look after the E, but there's also a development agenda that you need to look at. That balance is not straightforward, and banks will have a big opportunity to be able to help drive a realistic pathway to the balance. A second agenda around this obviously is that, the transition is important, but the transition needs to be what people call a just transition. Because if you're not thoughtful, the brunt of the cost of this transition will fall on the poorer countries and on the poorer segments of population. The southern countries, by and large, many of whom are not principally responsible for the stock of carbon in the atmosphere and have to do a lot for a stock of carbon that got created over 100 years by industrializations, have reason to say, hey, the allocation of responsibility should be balanced to reflect the social and developmental goals that we have. Similarly, within a country, if you look at who bears the brunt of the cost, if diesel prices go up, if fuel prices go up, the rich people, you pay another 2 rupees or 5 rupees or 10 rupees per liter for your car, it doesn't matter to you. But it is the poor people who suffer. So how do you make sure you get that right? Now, to that extent, banks have a role to play in trying to think of financial inclusion products, in trying to think about how they reach to these segments of society who are going to be more impacted by some of this change. And so creating products for financial inclusion is also part of the sustainability agenda, particularly the S part of the agenda.
Mr. Gupta, final question before I let you go. I mean, while I wish you a good night's sleep, we are going through really, really interesting times. What are the 2-3 things that keep you awake at night? You keep, that's a worry factor for you going forward.
Well, I mean, the many, but I'll focus on 2. Geopolitics is a new consideration. I mean, I've been very optimistic the last few years. My view has been that you will not get another Cold War or another Iron Curtain between the East and the West, China and the US networks. And that's because the world has become so integrated and fused even that it's very hard to untangle, distangle, etc. I have to say that the events of the last week are giving me reason to pause. It is a bit of a worry that if you do get a bifurcated world, if you do get economic blocks, even technology blocks, it will make life a lot more challenging. We have all benefited from the peace dividend of the last 50, 60, 70 years. And if you no longer have a peace dividend, you're going to have to do some tricky and adroit monitoring to see your way through it. But the two broader issues that do bother me, one is we talked about in the beginning of our conversation, the nature of technology is changing dramatically. And this has two consequences. One, it changes the competitive dynamic completely. Today, there is no industry distinction. In the past, I used to worry about other banks as competitors. Today, whether it's Google or Amazon or Alibaba or, all of them are competitors. And so trying to think your way through a minefield of a world where there are no more industry borders and everybody's a technology company, and the pace and nature of technology change is so tremendous, you've got to think very differently. The other issue this technology throws up, though, is a more profound issue, which is a social issue, issue of philosophy. I think we're going to have to grapple a lot with questions about morality and what is right. What makes us human beings? What makes us different from robots? What is right for AI to do and what should we not let AI do? What kind of data is appropriate and not appropriate? Is it okay to create a completely virtual metaverse world and let our kids only live in that world and not live in the real world? So these are philosophy questions that we're going to have to grapple with. The last set of questions is around the green and agenda and sustainability. And I'm convinced that we have to do the right thing for the planet. Otherwise, we have a doomed planet. But I worry that in our eagerness to do what is the politically right thing to do, we will miss the need for a just and balanced transition. And we will yo-yo in ways that are not good. If you think about the 17 SDGs, half of them are environmental, half of them are social, hunger, poverty, education, etc. We need to be able to balance the two, and we need to get this balance right.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gupta. It's always enriching talking to you, and I hope the audience enjoyed this conversation as much as I did.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure to be on your show again. Look forward to doing more of this.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Bye-bye.